All right, so it's on. We made
Bro,
it, Carl.
I know. I still can't believe and it was your birthday yesterday.
I said I wanted to have it set up by my birthday. We made it happen. And we're
Exactly.
here, the first episode of Everyday People with Ethan Harry.
Hey,
It's going to be great.
I still can't believe we're here.
Honestly, this idea went from, like ideation to manifestation so quickly. It was,
Absolutely.
it was honestly the matter of months. And it's a pretty legit studio we have here. We got a
absolutely.
legit producer, Riley Harry, in the house tonight. And, it feels pretty legit. It feels legit right now. That's for sure.
Exactly, 100%. Like, there's literally no difference between any podcast that I've actually ever watched, really, between like when we watch this back, it will look very similar to every single top of the line, like best in the field.
We'll see. We'll see. The audience will be the judge.
Exactly.
But this is what I'm touching on. I think the way that we just went to work so quick on all this type of stuff, setting up everything on the back end, all this physical gear. I want to talk about your work ethic. That's how I want to start this podcast off. And that is what got us here with both of us really. But I want to know where you get that from. Is it from your parents? Is it something that you derive from yourself? Is it something higher than you? What's your motivation?
That's very, very good question. Like the probably the best way I can kind of explain it is that, like, as an individual myself, I kind of always feel that, and I've explained this to like a lot of people, and my dad explained it best to me, where I'm very extroverted but also very introverted, and so I still talking to people. And obviously, people obviously have a go at me, for like, obviously, I do love a yarn, same as yourself. And
Agreed.
Yeah, and basically, what it comes down to is that I get a lot of energy from talking to people, interacting. I love sort of interacting with people, but then I also am very happy, even just by myself, just being able to like work on stuff, do things, training by myself. Obviously, I love to train with other people, but I still equally love even just training by myself, like, and sort of just putting in the work when no one's watching. And it's kind of like that's like, and I typically almost train harder when I'm actually at home with no one watching, like, than even when I'm at the gym. Like, and I still train probably too hard at the gym, but like that's kind of like the different scales between actually like just training in general, where you just know that, yeah, when you're doing it even harder, like when no one's watching, that's what really kind of improves you, and you know that you're in the right spot.
No, I completely, I know exactly the feeling that you're talking about. And I think the thing that I, correlate with the most is that extroverted energy, getting energy from other people. I'm an extroverted person, but it's real. When you're around people, there's stimulating conversation,
Exactly.
there's good vibes. It gives you energy. It feeds your soul. And I know that you got that same thing about you too.
Exactly.
And this is why like this is so good, because
Exactly.
it's this is fun for us. This is what we love doing, and like we get to do it legitimately now, I guess, and
100%.
record it, which is sick. And
Exactly.
dude, I think one of the things though is training when nobody else is watching. You do a lot of that. Like, I know you do a lot of stuff at home. I know you do a lot of long running and endurance things when no one's watching. What's necessarily like the motivation behind that? Because I understand the extroverted energy, getting things from other people and being in, like, Go Energy Fitness, seeing all the boys there training hard, having a fun time, sauna after, with Riley, with you, with all the boys that we go with. It's that environment that just manifests itself, right?
Exactly.
But when nobody's watching, it's so much harder. And everybody can relate to that.
Exactly.
But you since I met you, which is like 2.5 years ago, you've never had a problem with it, not once.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing, because like there's always, and this, you would be exactly the same, where just from like a training and discipline and mentality sort of standpoint, you sort of have probably heard me like a lot of the time, like just speak about like along the lines of pretty much like there's not really, I don't see like any alternative. And probably the best way I can explain that, especially going back to that, what was the first question you asked, it's like I always feel that I have energy because there's literally no like, even if you look at it from a very like kind of logical standpoint of like there's a certain amount of calories and energy that I need to consume in order to still thrive and basically survive and all that. And like, as long as I'm literally having enough calories in order to like sustain like myself actually like breathing and my heart pumping, like then I've obviously got energy.
Yeah.
Like it's more of actually a choice in your mentality about whether you pursue that thing that you're like not sure about, and or whether you actually just choose to have energy. Like you can literally choose to have energy
You're
even
so
when you
right.
don't really have it.
No, so many people are focused on like how can I get more energy? How can I get more motivated during my day? But it's a mindset thing. It's
Oh,
a discipline
100%.
thing, and it's almost more of a mindset thing than the legitimate energy thing, right?
Exactly.
People have been known to push themselves past their boundaries to achieve goals, and things like that don't make sense without this being in place.
Exactly. And even just another way of explaining it is that my like even my lifts sort of in the gym, they typically don't even change too much. Like when I haven't eaten enough like carbs for like energy for performance for a workout,
Mm.
it doesn't actually really change my reps that much. Like I'll only probably miss 1 or 2 reps when I know I haven't eaten enough carbs, and that kind of even proves it in a sense of itself, where and if you actually hype yourself up almost more for that set, putting more like mental energy kind of into it, you can almost offset those calories you didn't eat just by actually making sure that you like kind of get into the right headspace before that set, and you really like kind of like lock in pretty much.
Mm.
But yeah, and that's probably the most interesting kind of thing that I find, where it pretty much all starts like in the mind,
Mm.
and being able to like use that as your greatest asset. And you have to adopt the thinking and the actual kind of like persona pretty much of the most capable you. Like
Mm.
you have to become in your mind the most capable you before you even execute sort of anything. And like, why would you adopt any sort of thinking that you wouldn't want to adopt for someone who didn't have the results that you want to get? And why would you adopt the actual thinking of like something that actually limits you?
Mm.
Like, because that's like one of the biggest ones where people limit their potential, like typically mostly just because they kind of don't like think, and they go, "Oh, yeah, I just don't really think I can do that." Like,
Mm.
and
Mm.
and it's very, very predominant in a lot of people, and I understand it, and as do you. Like, where it's obviously hard to do the thing that maybe nags you, and you sort of feel like, "Oh, I just don't think I could start that podcast. I don't think I
Mm.
can do this, do that." Like, and it really just starts with kind of having like, because you'll never have all the information at the beginning. You'll only have your best guess, and when you execute on that best guess, that's that's when you actually find out the information that would have like given you the perfect conditions. But you'll never get those perfect conditions because the perfect conditions come after you gather the information after starting.
I agree.
And so
I
you
understand what you're
just,
saying.
yeah, you
And that's
just
why this thing is a work in progress. And we've talked about that. This
100%.
first episode might be terrible. Like, who knows if we even know what we're talking
No,
about, but
exactly.
we're going to get better over time. And that's the whole goal here. Right. And you
100%.
talk about this a lot. You talk about the skill of communication. And,
I
we talk
do.
about this all like
Yeah.
you love this yarn and it's for good reason.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, feel free to share. Like, I know you have a lot of
Yeah,
thoughts
a lot
about
of
it.
thoughts. Yeah, like and that's like the big one where probably the best. And I was even saying to this one last night. Like probably the biggest like thing about communication
Mm.
is obviously there are plenty of people who I've already said this to you before, where you are better than a lot of people who have been speaking many, many more years longer than you, but you're better not because you've been speaking sort of like more, because if they had been speaking more, they should be better. But they're not, like, and it's just because you have an internal feedback. And even if you haven't watched yourself back on a video or audio, you've created your own system for when you're actually talking to people, whether it be naturally or like very sort of directly, looked at yourself and actually created a feedback system for when you're talking to people, to where you actually understand like, and you can correct yourself before you even make that error.
Mm.
And that's very important. It's the continuous feedback of understanding, oh, I just repeated a word, I just almost used a filler word, and
Mm.
it's stopping it sort of.
Almost said almost said
Yeah,
almost
exactly.
stuttered,
and
all
that's
that.
and that's the most important thing, where if you can kind of, because it's okay to slip up every once in a
Mm.
while, but the big one is as long as you kind of get even just using the same sort of, because we all have words that we just like,
Yeah,
to
of course.
use.
Of course.
And it's just one of those things that you'll naturally kind of get into a nice rhythm, and you just like the, because it's even just from a perspective of like being able to like actually pronounce words. Like you'll have even words, I would argue, that you actually are very good at kind of just articulate and roll off the tongue very well. And so for some other people, it might not.
It's harder.
Like they might hear that same word that you love and you use all the time, like,
It's not natural to them.
and it's just not natural to them. And obviously, there's lots of people who don't have like a big vocabulary, but they're like, I've tried to extensively try to use words that like are a little bit sort of more kind of, I guess, dexterous in their sort of form, in order to just like kind of have like a make the communication just a lot like kind of nicer, like, and where I've like looked for words, and yeah, I've like seen them and I've been like, I really like this and I'd like to sort of implement it into my speaking, and that even helps as well,
No,
just from
agreed.
a communication standpoint.
I understand what you're saying. I like, until you broke this down to me a couple months ago when we started talking about this podcast idea, and you were like, listen, like, this theory of communication, I did not think of it like that at all. Like an internal feedback loop that I've, subconsciously created to get better at expressing myself. Like potentially that's what's going on, but really it just feels like I've got a God-given gift. I've had this gift for my entire life. I've always been able to talk well. I've always been able to communicate with people, and hopefully I can connect with people, not just face to face like I am with you, but through the audience too. And hopefully that connection can go through the screen. We're going to find that out in real time. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's probably one of the the biggest props that like I can even sort of give you as well, because it's not even just your ability to communicate, it's actually your ability to legitimately connect with people, which is a lot harder. Like you can sort of be like very articulate like Jordan Peterson. Like he's obviously a very good speaker, but you also need to be able to like emotionally and kind of like just be able to bring in people really well, and like draw the information out into the point of like where you make people feel important and very good by asking the questions that they really want to actually answer. Because obviously it's great obviously asking someone a question, but it's even better asking them a question that they want to answer, like they're dying to answer. And it's like similar to the legitimate question of asking someone what's a belief that you've had and you've carried with you for a very long time that you still haven't like actually expressed out loud to someone. And that's obviously a very good kind of question to like ask, because it really gets them like thinking internally. And that's almost a question where you never like, you'd expect them to like, because it's been pent up inside, you'd expect them to burst out with an answer, but because it's also asked in a particular way where you're kind of like digging deep, they still think about it like quite extensively. Whereas like you'd think that because it's been borrowed and they really want to answer it, the answer would basically just
Burst out of it.
burst out.
Well,
And yeah,
naturally, Carl, you got to answer your own question. Is there any beliefs in your own life that you haven't reconciled with, or anything that you want to get off your chest? Now's the time. You brought it up.
I know, and it's obviously a very good question.
No, well, like ideas and beliefs can empower you or enslave you. You know,
Exactly.
like they're so powerful, and people's
100%.
conception of reality and the life that they live can either bound you in chains or set you free. And exactly what we were talking about before. It's all a mindset thing.
Yeah.
So, and you always have to be constantly stripping yourself back and reflectively looking on the bigger picture to make sure there's not any misconceptions floating around in your own head, because it's dangerous. You don't want to.
is, yeah.
You don't want to. You can't base your life off misconceptions. You need the
Exactly.
truth within yourself.
Exactly. Like, and that's like probably even another sort of big sort of topic in of itself, where being able to not only like think critically, but also like kind of filter critically as well, where like it's not even just the information that you kind of like hear and see, like you also need to have like almost two separate like barriers for being able to detect whether things, and you can use little tricks and also very strategic like things that because the little tricks would be stuff like Occam's razor, where Occam's razor is a very interesting kind of little kind of tool that you can use in your belt.
Okay.
Where for communication and like filtering,
Mm.
where if someone sort of says like sort of something, or there's a problem that arises, like a very simple example would be if you walked into a house and you were just walking through the hall, and every time you walked through the hallway, the light flickered.
Mm.
And you're like, oh, I wonder if it's the actual conductors of that specific switch or the light up top, and they're just bridging between contact, and they're
I don't
having-
think about that. I think about ghosts and scary
they're-
shit.
exactly, like, but they're causing a hot joint, which means the cables and like the screws just not touching the cable like enough, and it's causing like a
Little flicker,
yeah,
little disturbance.
flicker and
For
disturbance.
people that don't know, Carl's an electrician, so you could talk about this all day. That has to be
Exactly.
that's context needed.
Exactly, like, but yeah, and the big one is that obviously that might be sort of particular to me or someone else who isn't like an electrician. Might think straight to something else that's very
Supernatural.
very like obviously out of pocket, pretty
Exactly,
much, and
exactly.
wouldn't be a very simple solution.
No.
But that's where Arkham's Razor comes in, where you think about like, oh yeah, it could be this, but Arkham's Razor is probably the most simple like solution. Like, is probably the answer to whatever problem arises, and it cuts through all of the kind of like all of the like unknowns
Yeah.
that might be popping up.
All the anxious thoughts, all the
Exactly.
worries, all the like, completely left field ideas, right field
Exactly.
ideas. It's just,
It just
central.
cuts right through, and
The most probable solution.
Exactly. It's usually that's what Arkham's Razor pretty much stands for. It's always the most simple like solution is often always correct. And for that case of the light, it's not ghosts. It's not like the switch faulty. It's not the light being faulty. It's literally just because you didn't notice that there was another switch that was a two-way switch, and it's down the hall, and there's a box leaning up against it. And when you step on the floorboards, it just kind of like it just flicks it a little bit, like, and then the light kind of like goes off. Like, and sort of it just flickers, and obviously that's a very simple thing that it was just you stepping on the floorboards. It's an old house, and yeah, there was like a box literally right next to the switch already, and it just kind of always flicked, and it wasn't even independent upon you actually stepping, like walking through the hallway. You just thought it was because you were walking through the hallway when the light flickered, but it was always flickering, but you didn't know that because you'd only just been in the house. And so it's stuff like that where you didn't even realize it. It's just always flickering.
I've never heard of this Arkham's Razor thing before. Is
Yeah.
it like, when did you hear about this? How did you learn about this?
Interestingly enough, yeah, I did hear it from it was from I think I originally heard it from Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh yeah.
And he's obviously another very good communicator. And
Sure.
he also kind of, the interesting thing about Neil deGrasse Tyson is he actually, especially for all of his, I think, media appearances, and also all of his television and kind of like, even if he's like speaking at like some big event, he'll actually write down, like, and he said this in a masterclass sort of a lecture that I'd sort of seen before, where he said that he writes everything down that he actually sort of says preemptively. Like, any sort of thing that he's doing in like the kind of media and all that, and in front of a camera, he'll like always pretty much like script the entire thing.
So he's not winging it at all.
Which
though when you hear him talk, it sounds like he is.
yeah, which
Like-
is very interesting.
That is
Like,
interesting.
and it shocked me.
I couldn't imagine doing that.
I know, like, but imagine how long he's obviously talking in a lot of those things, and like, imagine how much he's kind of like writing down, like, which is crazy to think. And
is crazy.
It's a very like interesting kind of, yeah, I guess, way of sort of actually making sure that you articulate perfectly, because I guess that's kind of, I guess, being the person that he is, like a very much a man of science, and kind of making sure that all the variables are calculated. I think he just likes, especially in his personality, having the most perfect thing where he can look at it and be like, yes, this is the spot on way. Like, this is the exact word that I need to use in order to articulate the point that I'm trying to get across.
I hear you. Speaking of Neil deGrasse Tyson and science,
Mm.
like we always chop it up about like a lot of nutritional science, a lot of like, you know, physiotherapy type science, a lot of gym bro science.
Yeah.
But do you have like, are you interested in science in general? Like, do you watch like Neil deGrasse Tyson podcasts and you're involved in science, whether that's astronomy, geology, you know, whatever it is? What are
Yeah.
you into?
To be fair, I kind of do, especially probably like even a couple years ago, I was actually watching it probably like a little bit more even than I am now.
Mm,
But like, yeah, that was the big one where even in sort of school for like year 12 and like year 11 and all the like electives, I was actually going to, and I probably should have like chosen kind of biology and maybe like earth enviro or something,
mm.
because, or like especially PDHPE, that's what I really should have like done. But I chose SLR because I thought that it was gonna kind of be still like similar to PDHPE but still
Mm.
get to play sport.
Yeah, I hear you.
Like, but PDHPE was like not really play sport, it was kind of just all the theory stuff, and I wanted to like learn specific stuff about like the kind of the body and all that, but still play the sport. Because like obviously, same as yourself, I really enjoy sort of like the movement
Physical
of,
challenge.
of the physical challenge and like stuff like that. And so that's the big one where I was gonna like I was thinking about doing like two of the really big sciences as well,
Mm.
because I really enjoyed it, and that even speaks to the results that I managed to achieve, even though I did like a lot of like ridiculous hard work, and I probably uh like you wouldn't believe the kind of study that was doing for the
I actually
HSC
can't.
where-
I actually can't. I know how hard you grind, and so
Yeah.
I could not imagine.
and-
If you're telling me now that you were working hard, I know you were doing
Yeah.
the most overtime hours of all time.
And yeah, like basically my like notes, especially for that senior science, because I started to do all the sciences combined,
Mhm.
which I didn't realize that that's like the one of the easier ones, because it's a little bit like not as like technical, which makes sense because it's a bit more like general,
A
right?
bit more broad.
And so you can't like go into biology and then have the same biology stuff like in senior science, because you're holistically kind of doing all the ones that you can choose together.
Mm.
And that's actually why I picked it, because it was just all because I wanted to kind of get a nice general like of everything, general overlook of everything.
Yes.
Because I just enjoyed all aspects of science.
Mm.
And so like from there, like, and I ended up like I actually wanted to, because I had like two full tubs, probably about like literally this big,
Mm.
and it was full of paper, and all that paper was all the stuff of like me printing out and like actually every single cycle test that I did each week, answering like a massive question. It was everything that I'd ever accumulated through that senior science like stuff.
Yeah.
And here's like probably the most interesting fact that speaks to how hard I worked in that science class, where you know how you have obviously stuff where it weighs against the HSC.
Mm.
I got 100% for every single thing that was weighted to the HSC before, the HSC for senior science, which like sounds ridiculous, like because you almost shouldn't be able to kind of like do that.
Yeah.
But
And you would have had the #1 ranking as well,
Yeah.
which is the most important thing
Yeah,
going into those final
exactly.
exams, right?
and the crazy thing is yeah, that was probably very like that was actually probably
That's
what made me
insane.
more proud of that achievement almost than what I even did in the HSC, because I knew that it took like, because I couldn't switch off at all, because if I had even lost 1 mark on that lead up before the HSC,
Yeah.
like it obviously wouldn't have like been 100% weighing. I would have like lost a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
But
You would have got like
obviously it would've- yeah.
99.65 or whatever if you lost 2 marks on the final or whatever.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
I hear you.
And-
We've never chopped it up about HSC before. Dude, I don't know if you would want to live on the show.
Yeah.
But what did you get? What was your ATAR?
Yeah, so I actually didn't even go for like the ATAR. Like I literally sort of ended up sort of moving from the English. It was because I was in the standard English and all that, but because they didn't do anything creative like with English in general, I
Mhm.
just didn't feel that it was very valuable. Like it was all just regurgitation.
Mm.
And so I kind of just went like, let me just not focus on this, because I don't think it's really important for me. And then I was just in the regular, general sort of 2 maths sort of and all that. and I pretty much did like all the regular stuff, and I did so it was like the sort of general maths 2, and then the English, which was actually the English studies.
Mm,
So it was kind of just more practical stuff for like resumes and all that.
mm.
And then from there, it was also the SLR, and then the actual senior science. And the senior science was obviously the one that I was most proud of, because I think I ended up getting like 93 or something, like on the actual HC like assessment or whatever.
Wow.
And so that was like a big one. And all the other results were pretty sort of good, apart from like, because I had electrotechnology,
Yeah.
and electrotechnology like was obviously what I'm kind of doing now.
Doing right now.
And yeah, there is actually a whole backstory, which I might even sort of go into further at like a later date or something. But all my mates like they all understand. But there was a teacher, and it's very very like, long story short, like there was a teacher who Lynn, he's at the TAFE, Brookvale.
Okay. All right.
And he's very funny. But he basically created like almost this funny thing where after, because I did TVET for year like kind of 11 and 12,
Mm.
and so I was going to TAFE on Tuesdays.
Yep.
And so I'd see him like, and we'd do all our lessons, and that actually enabled me to, when I was left school, I went straight to like the halfway through TAFE. So I was already halfway through TAFE. And obviously I saw Lynn again when I was out of school doing the legit when I was apprentice.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had him a bunch of times. And because I got 75, I think, in the HSC or whatever for electrotechnology, it was a band 4. And whenever Lynn would see me, he would never fail to mention, he'd be like, "Oh, Kyle, my band 4 student." It's just like, I'm so proud of you. And literally it was like every time he like, and I love that he's fantastic, like, and he's very funny. And but yeah, it was like but he really does care, like he really like, and he actually passes everyone. That's like another thing that because he always passes like sort of people who like might be struggling, which is also like just a very like sort of nice thing, because most people don't get like into the actual trades because they did sort of very well, like, because if I obviously did an ATAR, I'm sure I probably would have got a pretty good kind of like a pretty reasonable ATAR, like nothing crazy. But like a lot of people, like they don't like the academic side of like studying and all that.
Yes.
And kind of like learning in that fashion with school. And so like the fact that you kind of have to do those same sort of tests in TAFE, it's kind of like that's not what they wanted.
Yes.
And so it is a bit like hard, and I understand that like Lynn will try and help people as much as possible get through. And so, but yeah, like that was like the big sort of like backstory, where it was very funny every single time for the next like 3 years when I saw him. Like he would always say that in class, like a full of 30 people, and he'd be like, Kai, band 4 student, and it is very obviously very funny. But like, yeah, that's kind of like the real funny thing sort of about that.
It's crazy how much of an impact teachers have on your life so early on, and I think people don't reflect on it enough, the impact teachers have on our lives and the way that we develop, especially in that like pre-developmental stage of being like 15, 16, 17, 18.
Yeah.
You're so malleable. You're like, you're ready to learn. You've got more energy than you ever will have in your life.
Exactly.
And the teachers shape you in a way that nobody else really does,
Exactly.
And there's so many teachers that have made me who I am, really. Like, I'm just a product of everybody I've known and everybody who's taught me what I know. And teachers are a big part of that. They're a big portion of it.
Absolutely. Like, and that's actually another sort of little sort of tidbit that I'd like sort of go on about as well, where typically people will say, like, obviously it's like the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, like that will kind of dictate like a lot of the stuff that goes on in your life. But typically, especially from a monetary sort of standpoint, it actually is the 5 people you compare yourself to. And because it's the reason why I believe more of the sort of 5 people you kind of compare yourself to, like, which is that they're probably also the people who are around you anyway, that you compare yourself to the ones who are obviously close to you, like, because obviously they're in your immediate vicinity. But the big one sort of is the reason why I feel like that's the case is more along the lines that like you'll end up like, because obviously you compare yourself sort of to them, and you'll make like more, and that's the big reason is because your actual income, like in your kind of salary and all that, and your success is almost, and they've actually like studied it or whatever from statistics and all that. You're actually more likely, if you grew up like in a successful neighborhood,
Mm,
you are more likely to actually make like this that same amount of kind of like money and be very successful, and that's because you're just in there, and it's like the opportunities that you might sort of still surround yourself with.
mm,
And so it's typically kind of the people you can compare, and then also like a little bit. And so I think it plays on a little bit of both.
mm,
Where, but I do think that especially from like a success and kind of like making sort of money sort of standpoint, like entrepreneurial standpoint,
mhm.
it's more the people who you compare yourself to.
Okay.
Because typically, if you're also like surrounded by like if you're the person like maybe in a friend group who's just making like the most by a sort of like a large margin,
Mm,
you might like not compare yourself at all to like your friends, like the like that maybe aren't making as much,
mm,
just because like, that's just not what you do. But you do compare yourself maybe even to your dad,
mm,
who maybe made a whole bunch more money than you,
mm.
like even though you're actually doing really well.
Yeah. So it's in
Like,
it's more in the minds than it is in reality.
yeah,
Like just because you're hanging out with your friends doesn't necessarily mean they're going to
exactly.
be the metric of comparison
Oh,
that you judge yourself
100%.
against. I think, everyone always says that, like, you're the sum of the five people you spend the most time with. And I think, a large portion of that saying is true, but I think
Yeah,
it's also a bit restrictive too, because it means
yeah,
that, like, then it means that, if I'm the sum of the, five people I hang out with, then I got to cut some bad people out of my life, right? And I don't think necessarily that's bad, but it can be a restrictive mindset to have. Because
yeah.
I think, the best way to address it is like, especially you and I, who have a lot of energy and a lot of time for everyone, it seems,
Mm,
right? We're able to give that and share that and be a light in people's lives and just be a smiling face, a helping hand. And, I don't think there's any reason to turn people away and not share that gift that you have because I'm trying to protect my inner peace, my inner sanctity. I
yeah,
think, that comes first, and then, being able to express yourself comes second, like having that,
absolutely.
having that inner kind of like, the peace and knowing your true self and, being able to express that comes after. What have you done any work on knowing your true self or anything around like any meditation, any spiritual practices? I know we've talked about this before. You're
Yeah, we
not
had.
religious.
Yeah,
Is that true?
that's very true.
And
Yeah,
talk me through how you feel about all spirituality, all that we've just talked about.
it is interesting because I would probably compartmentalize myself more along the lines of just kind of, especially more based in logic, which goes back to I think like the first sort of like questions you were asking, where I think about like just my mind like a lot, and kind of just being able to like look at things and try be the most capable person that I could possibly be, and like what would I choose to adopt in order to like actually make that happen.
Mm,
And that kind of like comes back even to like obviously like what you like kind of adopt, but then I try to be like a realist. Like because that's what you kind of want to be in this life. You just want to obviously be a realist, be very logical, and be able to like understand the truths and say the truths, even like because when you talk about even just like probably one of the greatest qualities that you could possibly have is, which is like kind of authenticity, being able to say like as authenticity, I guess, at its most like fundamental level is almost just saying kind of like you just say like what you're sort of thinking and like what you kind of feel like and it's like without like any kind of like repercussions and like or like pain sort of like from that. And like it's basically just you knowing that there's like nothing that really if you remove every single piece of like judgment or like anything that can happen, then you can like say what you sort of feel. And you need to have that like just within yourself anyway, because obviously there's going to be like a bunch of people who like say stuff like that's fine, like they can continue sort of saying whatever they want, but that's like probably the best quality you could possibly have. And like, but you need to develop that quality, like where it's like any skill. And that's why it's hard, because there's a lot of people who will say stuff like, oh you need to be like more charismatic, but that doesn't help you. because like what's charismatic? Like if you were to tell someone like, oh yeah, be more charismatic, it's just like that's not going to help them at all. But a lot of
Exactly.
people do that.
Mm.
They'll kind of just be, oh yeah, you need to be more like this or
Yeah,
whatever.
you
Or something.
need to be more confident, more
Yeah,
charismatic,
like,
more this,
and
more that, without any actionable steps on how to get there.
exactly. Because
Yeah.
you need to break down like what does it actually mean to be charismatic? Well,
Mm.
it means to listen very attentively and like look at someone in the eyes when you're talking. It means to like do stuff like where you're legitimately like actually kind of maybe using your hands in order to try and articulate your point, and like it's other stuff like where you kind of like even just from other like sort of characteristics that you might not even be aware of, a lot of the stuff that you sort of might do which increases your supposed like charisma. But all of those things that I've just listed pretty much, like where like using your hands, like that's just tiny little skills. And so what does it mean to be charismatic? It's being charismatic is literally a whole subset of little skills that you need to acquire, and you'll probably almost never kind of accumulate like all of them,
Mm.
because based on like the way that you want to communicate and what's most effective for like your type of communication. Because I actually think that a lot of people actually like, because if you were trying to come, because obviously like as we were talking about before,
Mm.
if you wanted to become a better speaker, I would say that it wouldn't really help you as much if you tried to copy the exact tone, cadence, and stuff of someone like another great speaker, like Obama or something, where like he's very good at kind of like the pauses.
He's a great speaker.
And
He's
but
such a good speaker.
exactly. But yeah, that's the big one where I think that a lot of people, if they tried to just kind of copy it and just go off that, it probably wouldn't actually help them as much. Like, but
You
what
got to develop your own style,
exactly,
your own.
exactly, and yeah, and what it comes down to as well is like legitimately just sort of even if you just take like little very kind of general things from him, where just like pausing more, like maybe going a bit slower, and it's like typically all that sort of stuff there, that where you just take sort of stuff that's not too nuanced, but just like general things that you know that is pretty much, if it works almost like for everyone, like then you kind of know it'll probably work for yourself. And you just take those kind of big ones where it's like pausing, like trying to think more like before you speak and trying to listen more attentively. And like even just for me, like I actually find that like even just at work, especially like at the beginning, like I think this is like obviously a form of probably the ADHD that I kind of have, which I think is actually like my superpower or whatever. Because exactly going back to what we started with mindset, like if I was to think that ADHD like made me like less capable, like then like
Then it would.
it's probably the dumbest thing I could possibly do in order to make myself more capable. Be like, oh yeah, I'm just so erratic, I can't think, like, and if I got
Put doubts in your own head that
Exactly.
you don't even know legitimate.
Exactly.
And all it takes is that mindset shift to turn a negative into a positive, and that
100%.
placebo effect is enough
Oh,
to get you over the line. It's
exactly.
and that's the thing. People talk about not having negative ideas about yourself in your head, otherwise they will manifest into reality.
Yeah.
And I think what you're talking about is a prime example.
100%. And like even just getting back to like because obviously you asked about the sort of the spiritual and the meditation is like
We got off topic a little bit. Yeah, we started talking about communication again.
But we're very good at that, like this is what my dad always says, like I'm very good at segues, and I'll always like, this is the funny thing is maybe what makes like me like just kind of almost good at communication, just from the fact that like it's funny, like I can very easily segue into like, especially into like topics that I like, which is funny, where you might just be talking to me about like the weather or like any other like dense sort of topic.
Next minute you're hearing about tricep extensions,
exactly,
and hamstring curls, and all the stuff we've been talking about for 3 years now.
100%. And I'll manage to segue it to like soccer, playing football or whatever. I'll be like, oh yeah, the Champions League final,
Well, it's part of being extrovert. Having good chat is part of being extrovert.
Absolutely. But yeah, getting back to, I guess, like the kind of
spiritual essence.
Like I kind of, I do like to sort of think about like But yeah, my biggest thing is because like that's why I started the preface of being like very realist and very logical.
Mm,
Like because I very much like that,
mm,
especially because it's very measurable. Because
I
obviously being
understand.
spiritual, like it's not very
It's the
measurable.
most immeasurable thing that we have.
Exactly. But I do feel like there's probably a bit of spirit in kind of even just like guarding your mind and all that. Like I do feel there probably actually is. And obviously there's like obviously a lot of kind of topics on the fact that obviously our brains, you know, they have a certain frequency of like obviously that's how this kind of tracks with sleep and all that, how it finds the deep sleep and all that. And obviously if you resonate and we all kind of resonate a particular frequency, even these lights, they're 50 hertz
Mm.
like all the
Our
time.
phones and
it,
computers and headphones giving off EMF,
exactly. And
radio
so
signal.
and that's like goes back to the energy, like spiritual. It's kind of yeah, you can certainly make like a good argument for kind of yeah those sorts of things. But yeah, I typically try and stay away from them only because I'd rather kind of think more about just doing the sort of work, like where like just kind of having the stuff like done and getting into it. Uh, and that's kind of like typically always the hardest sort of thing. It's just kind of starting. It's like eating the frog.
No,
Like that's
I
that's
understand.
another great book. I'm
You
sure
eat
you've
it in the
probably heard.
morning, right? Yeah,
Exactly.
first
Yeah.
thing. Everyone talks about that.
Yeah.
I think
Exactly.
your mindset's so logical and it makes so much sense because I know you so well.
Yeah.
And it like this answer that you're giving right now lines up to the rest of your character really well because you're just a logically minded person. I want to talk a little bit about you being a Sparky too and how that just piques your interest. And I know you get so passionate and so in the details about it. And as you said, it's very like being an electrician, it's very binary. There's a right and wrong answer. And I know something being measurable, something
Yeah.
being practical, that's very important to you. So it makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense that you're an electrician.
Yeah.
But feel free to share about that.
Yeah, it's like yeah, you using the hands and like that and that's even what like my dad sort of said to me, obviously, right, where he was like, you know, I've known you for a very long time, which he certainly has, and he said
Your whole life, actually.
yeah, exactly.
No, agreed.
That's why it's hilarious, and like I kind of sort of, and he said to me, he was like, you know, I cannot really see you. And I agree. Like he's 100% right. I feel that I can. He said like these exact words are pretty much I cannot see you really in the boardroom in like
In an
the
office
office
environment.
in there
I
just
hear you.
sitting like typing away
Got too much passion in you.
yeah, and I actually do like like sort of being like on the computer, like learning stuff and all that, and like doing sort of stuff using that technology. But yeah, I think that nothing also beats being able to really like use your hands to like build stuff and like and that's actually like the I guess the surface and like surface level kind of like interface,
Mm.
obviously, like where when you're doing the stuff like as like a Sparky, it's very like it's not surface level anymore. It's very like internal to the stuff that really goes on behind like the actual very capable technologies that we have like today, where obviously the motherboards are more like on the engineer's side, but we still actually like work alongside that very strongly,
Mm.
and they're all very similar. It's just that typically like all the motherboards are like kind of very small, sort of like very small kind of like little sort of intricate pieces of like equipment, like all your little resistors and capacitors. And then we like as electricians, we don't really deal with that stuff, but we deal with the massive capacitors, the massive batteries and all that sort of stuff. And that's kind of like what separates, I guess, like the engineers typically from like the electricians, where you kind of have we usually sort of work on like obviously the massive big cables, whereas they're very technical on the small little solders. Not that we still do like we still do plenty of like soldering and like on small sort of things, but typically yeah, for us it's like a lot more kind of like dangerous as well,
Mm.
especially when you're doing level 2 sort of stuff where it's actually a lot of the stuff where you're doing power lines, big substations,
Mm.
and that might even be what I get myself into like in the future. Like I'm not sort of too sure, but yeah, that would be a very interesting path to kind of go down because it's very as much as it's dangerous, it's very kind of interesting because it's like you're basically you're going back to like the origin like where if I explain it's almost like the in the Matrix where you go back to the source and that's kind of like how it feels obviously working on the level 2 stuff where you're going to the actual source of where all the power is generated like and all the big substations and then the main substation and yeah that's like a very sort of interesting sort of like place to sort of be like even just from the danger obviously like aspect of how like how much current and like
If something goes
voltage is
wrong,
coming
it goes
through.
really wrong.
Exactly and so
And typically, the more dangerous jobs, the bigger the
yeah
money. You know, I've got
exactly
a mate named Dylan. He's a pilot, and he's always telling me about these crazy skits jobs that he could do with his pilot's license. And in California, even they have these big planes that go over because was huge fires there.
Yeah.
Just like a couple of months ago.
Absolutely, yeah.
But they always have large fires, so they have these pilots that are like specifically for dropping huge amounts of water on like
yeah massive land.
the redwood forest that they got over there that just light up every
Goodness
single
me.
year. And he was like, the people that do that, they do it for like one season. They get like 300K for like just a 12-week period,
What?
right? Because the risk of dumping so much load out of an airplane,
yeah, is
right,
large.
so frequently is it's huge. That's the one thing that he always tells me about because I've been in a plane with him before, which is like 2 or 3 other
Yeah.
people, and it's all about weight. It's all about one, doing the work and making sure you got the right planning in place, the right weather conditions, all that sort of stuff. But it's all about the weight. When you dump in a lot of weight like that, you open yourself up to imbalances in the aircraft, and that's where things can go wrong. So
Yeah.
he'd actually be a great guest for the show. I'm really excited to bring him on.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the thing. The reason I love this show so much is because I know so many amazing people, and it almost feels like I'm doing a disservice by not showing the world all these amazing people that I know.
that are hidden, hidden
exactly.
gems.
And that's the whole point of the show. Everyday people. Everyone's a hidden gem. Everyone's got a story to tell. Everyone's got something interesting to say. And I feel like I can I can do my best to
Yeah,
extract that out of them, right?
Exactly.
And to make an entertaining show for everybody. And as we go, it'll just be people that I know, people that recommendations we get. But we could have some big guests on here, and it would be a lot of fun to explore fun topics like that we love, like exercise, like diet, like nutrition, like physiotherapy, all that type of stuff. Like, it would be awesome to have some of those guys in. I was actually thinking, I've got this amazing physio. His name's Danny, and he is actually the best. And he's just like me. He's an extrovert.
Yeah.
He loves the chat. Honestly, we'll have physio sessions, and they're only meant to go for like 30 minutes. and
Yeah.
They'll just go for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
We'll just talk
Right
forever.
away
Like, all right, I'm
through.
doing this. We're going to
Do
do
it.
sauna, cold plunge, this exercise, that exercise, this diet, this biohacking, all this stuff. He loves it. And, he would be a great guest for the show too.
100%.
So, and that's why we're starting it up, because I'm lucky enough to be in a position to know all these people. And
100%.
without them, this wouldn't be possible.
100%. Like, yeah, and it's like obviously it's a skill in itself, like being able to obviously extract like all that valuable and like those amazing stories that they sort of like have within, and just the fact that like you can have like a network which is so like sort of kind of colorful like that. We've got all sorts of people because like they always talk about like the second degrees of like separation where you almost know so many more people than you actually sort of specifically know in person, just because there's so many there's just 1 degree of almost like separation between you and like some person that even might even change your life. Like there might be like you might have like in the future, like there might be 1 degree of separation between one friend that like sort of now who like, and that 1 degree of separation, you meet them maybe 3 years from now and they become a fantastic friend or whatever, but you just had no idea that they've obviously like existed, and there was just this tiny little barrier between sort of you meeting and all that. And it's just one day the barrier kind of closes because like some event, whether it might be even a wedding or something, and for some reason you manage to like cross paths. And that's like the amazing thing where you're probably constantly, you already have this illustrious kind of like group of people that you kind of like know, and you want to obviously bring them on, and like, but that will even continually expand, which is like even more sort of amazing. Like, because obviously there's so much like variety and ability to bring sort of people on in order to like extract that interesting insights, and that will be obviously like what the audience wants to hear. Like it's literally like exactly that, where yeah, just like bringing sort of people on that have interesting insights, where hopefully for the majority of like the audience, they'll say something and they'll be like, I never thought of it that way.
Mm.
And that's what you want with pretty much everything.
You just want it to connect. Whatever I want to like positively connect with the audience. You don't want to be saying things that invoke, a negative response, because you can do that too. You
Yeah.
can come on a platform and say just like, crazy things to get an outlandish response. But I think, the best way, and I think the goal for me and the guest is to, create entertaining conversations through that connection. And it doesn't matter what you're talking about. It just matters about your own passion for the subject. If we're breaking it down about a certain exercise or about an MMA fight or something like that, I think that passion gets translated out of us through the screen onto the, into the audience.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're counting on, really. That'll be the metric for success. Because that's all this is. It's just you and me sitting down, having an authentic conversation. There's nothing fancy about it. And if we can't connect to the audience, then we're not going to have a successful show.
Oh, exactly.
And that is one of we've talked about a lot of the challenges on this show and like what are some of the hurdles that we'll have to get through. I remember the first one I told you was being comfortable in this set.
Yeah.
I think that was a big one, because if I'm not comfortable, then I'm not going to be able to express myself as freely and as openly as I possibly can.
Exactly.
Right. But if I'm comfy, if I'm settled, if I'm in an environment I know, that's why it was so important to set this up here in my house and just, have everyone here, have my brother producing the episode, have you producing the episodes normally, and just be surrounded by friends, bringing friends in. I'm comfortable. I'm free.
Exactly.
It feels natural. It feels like we're just talking as we
flow,
almost do every day.
Right in the thought,
Yeah, exactly.
We're
Classic
sitting right
sauna
there.
conversation. No, I hear you. Well, I think, we talked about spirituality a little bit, but I think for a lot of people, they have a similar kind of outlook to you. They're very logic based. They've never really put much thought into necessarily higher things because they're so focused on the challenges of today, right? I think what's interesting though is when people like that have a spiritual experience, sometimes they completely like shut it down, or sometimes it completely changes their life. Have you ever had like any spiritual experiences, any like, thoughts or connections that you felt have come from divine sources, and if something was to happen, would you be open to it, or is this something you're closed off from?
It would be something that I'd certainly be very open to, because like just from my mindset in general, like I'm always critically thinking and filtering. But the thing is though, is like if something sort of like comes up and it like, even if it challenges my sort of preconceived notions of like what I believe, there's no way that I would ever like just completely outright reject it, because there's no point in completely just seeing something, like especially like even if it seems pretty impossible like to begin with, like I would still at least like give it certainly some thought and try and actually like understand. And even if it's even if something was very repulsive to me like at the beginning, like I would still try and like understand like why does this like make me feel this certain sort of way when I've kind of like with this new information, like why am I kind of so defensive to it maybe.
Exactly.
And then like once you kind of figure that, you can kind of, it unlocks the key to like allow it to like fully be integrated. And then you kind of go, now that I've like lost that first like pushback of like, obviously people don't like change typically, that's the big one, where like once you like resist that first bit, then you can be like, so like now I'm not thinking, because you have to think about things like, and this is about like, this almost goes back to discipline, where you have to think about things mentally and not emotionally. Because if you're always going on to like your feelings, how you like want to think about this, like typically that will pull you away from the realistic goals that you actually want to like achieve.
I think a lot of that is also in the reaction though. I think, if you say something negative to me now that hurts my feelings, right? I can't help but being emotional. I'm a human being. Like, we all feel emotion, but it's how you address react to it,
exactly.
right? And that's what you can control, because you can't necessarily control how you feel, right? You can put certain things in place to, give yourself the best chance of feeling good.
Yeah.
But you can't necessarily just turn a switch and not be angry or not be sad or instantly be happy.
Exactly.
And it's in your reaction to it. And it's in your attitude and in your mindset, like you said.
100%. And yeah, that's a very good point, which leads on to like another thing where obviously stoicism, especially in the last year, has been a very like interesting topic where almost you put it anywhere like online and on YouTube, it just gets lots of like kind of views and all that. And just because it's very like in especially in the kind of like the manosphere and all that sort of stuff. But
The red pill
yeah,
verse.
exactly. And so
It doesn't help with this giant red
Yeah.
curtain behind me either.
Exactly.
We originally had two blue
Yeah.
curtains, but it was too dark, so we had to we got the red curtain, and it looks
Yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah, red pill,
But,
blue pill. It
yeah.
actually is the Matrix.
I know,
You know, like,
we're in the Matrix. It's
But-
crazy.
but yeah, like what I was gonna say, I guess, about the stoicism was pretty much along the lines of like people sort of will say like obviously in stoicism like, oh yeah, you're not really meant to feel anything, but that's actually completely goes against all of the writings from people like, you know, Seneca and, you know, like Socrates and all those sorts of people, because they actually they spoke more along the lines of like feel things extremely deeply, but you just don't really change, like it doesn't change and affect like the things you actually need to sort of do basically. And that's what it sort of comes down to, like where you like still need to like and they actually say like along the lines of like they want you to feel things, because like that's like that's pretty much the spice of life. Like actually feeling like I'm actually glad that I almost have almost a bit more, like I have very much my dad's and my father's like logical sort of side of like thinking and all that.
Yeah.
But I also have very deeply ingrained like my kind of mother's very sensitive kind of like and my parents, like they've even spoken to me and like they've kind of like said that they really did try and kind of teach us empathy, like very much so, like and try and like, and I think it's like turned certainly like me and my brother and my sister into very like obviously very good people, like, you know, like, and obviously you can like argue all you want about like, oh, you come out of the womb like this, like there's not really much teaching, but like
That's not
like,
true.
like that it can't really be true, like because the fact is that like typically the like even just the information you learn and like your childhood very much impacts kind of like what will happen later in life, and that's
In
why
ways we don't even
comprehend.
consider. Yeah, we can't
Exactly.
even comprehend.
We can't even comprehend. Like,
It's nature and nurture. It's like, you know, it's a tale as old as time. And, you know, people lean, you know, some on the nature side for certain conversations, and then some lean more on the nurture side for
Yeah.
other conversations. But it's a mix, it's a balance. You're predetermined by these two forces.
Exactly.
Right? Your genetics and then what your experience of life is. And that can,
Exactly.
and you know, those things can hold you back, but they can enhance you too. The problem is when you're a child, you don't get to decide.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't get any influence or any say on what's going on around you. Right. And only once you, like, you know, if you're in a destructive household, or you're in a household that causes you stress or distress or anything
Yeah.
like that, you have to wait so long to get out of that environment, which is negatively impacting you
Yeah.
and could for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And that's why being a good parent, instilling empathy, instilling these values, and making it more than just, you know, academic results or being an impressive person, going beyond that and saying, I want to raise good kids who have good morals and are good people.
Exactly.
That's the most important thing, because
Yeah.
then it opens you up for
Yeah.
friendships, for relationships, for, you know, all the joys of life, and to build an attitude and a mindset that you have. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Because if you're not grounded, if you don't know yourself and you don't, you know, have love for others, it's very hard to build a base on
Yeah.
something that can't stand, you know?
Oh, 100%. You have hit the nail on the head there. Like where, especially even just from like, and you can even look at this from like kind of like, obviously it's very nice and easy and very simple to look at the extremes of sort of things. And like, if you look at the extremes of like, especially even just money being like an amplifier, where like, if you like were sort of given like $20 million and you were someone who was very like was a very impressive person, but you just didn't have money and you were very grounded, you're a very good person to people, like that would actually amplify your true sort of character and all that. But if you were someone who weren't actually a very like sort of good person, whether it be just you choosing like to go down the wrong path, or like, yeah, you just weren't sort of, obviously like, it was the way that you were raised and all that, like that will actually amplify you into like being like not good person. like with all that money, you'll kind of get the success even without, like, especially if it's like success without it being warranted, where you haven't even done any sort of work to really deserve it.
Mm.
Because in your mind, you'll probably still, it would be very hard for you to, if you were just given sort of that money somehow, you like won it or whatever, like it'd be very hard for you to kind of feel like, yeah, I deserve kind of like this from my hard work. And that's the reason, like, why, like, it's very sort of like anything that I, especially, and this even comes back to mindset as well, like where anything that I wanted to sort of do, I would always want it to be like hard, especially because if it's the hardest path, no one's really going to follow. And it's not that everything, once you get through the hardest part, which is the start, everything will get easier. It's just that you, like, those dragons that you have to slay, they will only get bigger, but you'll be more capable to actually slay the beast and actually get to the next level. Because like when you sort of like start, you're fighting that dragon with just a stone, and it's like David against Goliath.
Yeah.
But then and those dragons will actually become bigger, but next time you verse that main sort of boss, that main dragon, you'll have a nuke.
Yeah, I get you.
And you've gone from the stone and you've acquired all these skills, and you can basically slay pretty much any sort of like thing that basically comes like across your path. And that's kind of like what it, like, I guess, comes down to. You want it to be hard, and that will obviously make it sweeter. And honestly, like, this is probably the biggest one, and probably my favorite lesson that I've almost like learned sort of just in time as well, where the people, like, say when you obviously start up your business, you start up your podcast or whatever, like, obviously there will be people who will obviously be like, oh, why are you doing that? Or like, yeah, like, well, what's the go? Like I don't understand why you want to do this. Like, and there'll be all sorts of stuff, like all sorts of noise.
People are gonna talk.
And people are gonna talk. And like the big sort of like one about it is they'll say, oh yeah, you won't be successful. There's no way you're gonna make any money from it. Yeah, it's
You're just wasting your time.
Like,
You're gonna give up eventually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously it's very like, it sits very forward facing in my mind, because this is our first episode, and like I was very excited, and like, but it's what it sort of comes down to is obviously those people, like, they will kind of obviously be like naysayer, do all that stuff, and they will actually be right for a very long time that you maybe not going to be successful. And you'll actually have to sort of say, you'll have to bite the bullet, because they will be right. They'll be like, oh yeah, you're not going to make it work, you're not going to make it successful, and they'll be right, but they're thinking on a short timeline. They're not thinking a decade, because they're thinking in weeks. We're thinking in years and decades for this to be like successful. And that's what they don't understand, because not many people are willing to wait a year to get the success that is pretty much guaranteed, because they will go along the typical path of uninformed optimism, then informed pessimism, and then that's pretty much where everyone quits. And then beyond that informed pessimism, where you're like, this is actually really hard, that's where the success comes in, and it shoots back up. And from there, obviously, you have to just understand that they're going to be right, but one day you will actually be right. And on that day, it's basically, you played the game, and you didn't
made it.
Quit. You went all the way, and and from there, and that's like a very nice like lesson that I always kind of think about, like, where it's like, they're going to be right for a very long time, but like one day
they'll be wrong. And they'll be wrong forever.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Like, and it'll speak volumes.
We'll see. You know, like, that is such a good way of putting it. That is like, it's actually, that's the best way that we've put it. We've talked a lot about the, potential success of this podcast. Is it going to work? Is it going to be feasible at all? But that is a really nice way of laying it out. But I think, and we've talked about this too, for the first however many episodes, I just want to have fun. I want this to be a good conversation between friends. I want us to have fun. I don't really want us to focus on like the fact that there's cameras here and any of that stuff. I just want this to be a genuine, authentic connection that we share in, and we both leave this room going, this was awesome. That was a lot of fun. When do we get to do this again? And in the test episodes that we've done, they have been a lot of fun. And so far, this is awesome. Carl, I got something to tell you. I've been restricting you from this information for the
Right.
show. For the show, not for the first episode. I didn't
Yeah.
know it was going to fall on this week.
Yeah.
But right now, we've talked a lot about discipline. We've talked a lot about mindset. We've talked a lot about spirituality. Right now, I'm 3 days into a 5-day fast. So since Sunday night, I haven't had any food.
Yeah.
Right, and it's Wednesday night now. So like, I know, and I didn't want to, like, I don't want to bring this, but I know we
Yeah.
talk all the time, and so I've
Yeah.
been trying to, like, keep this away from you because it's
Yeah.
hard, right?
Yeah.
I remember yesterday you're like, oh, you having any big birthday dinner or anything? I was like, oh, nah, just chilling out, nothing crazy,
Yeah.
But I wanted to talk about it on the show because I thought it would be interesting for the audience and to get your live reaction to it as well.
Oh, exactly.
Like, so yeah, that's been my journey. I do it for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of health reasons I do it
Yeah.
for.
Oh, exactly.
But then it's a very spiritual practice too, and it definitely draws me closer to God.
Oh,
And I think it's a very disciplined mindset, focused activity too. It builds it up because not eating, it's really hard, especially
Yeah.
for the first 2 days. Right now, I'm fine, and like
Yeah.
right now, and the first 2 days, you're brain foggy, you're battling. It's really
Yeah,
tough,
it's like-
right? Because your body's just freaking out, like I need food, I need food, I
Yeah.
need, and you just, your body's wigging out,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But eventually, once you get to the stage of entering ketosis, your body goes into like a system called like autophagy, I think it is, and
Yeah.
that means that your body's able to regenerate itself, right? And that happens after that second day, and then your body kind of
Exactly.
flips, your hunger hormones come down, and now you're in a far more clear state of mind. So I'm in the good zone
Yeah,
right now.
right now.
I'm in day 3, 4, because 3, 4, and 5, they're not going to be easy either, but they're definitely better than day 1 and 2.
Yeah.
I tell you what, day 1, you're sitting there at dinner, and you're not sitting there at dinner. You're
Yeah.
not having dinner. I'm in my room, just like sitting there
Yeah.
on the side of my bed.
Not thinking about food.
But man, it's tough. But then day 3 comes around, and it's like, it's a different type of clarity. And people talk about this who are on the carnivore diet or who do fasting for long periods of time. Your brain functioning on ketones and using the ketones in your
Yeah.
body for energy is far better than using carbohydrates and glucose and glycogen and all the things that we derive from carbs and other foods.
That's a very interesting point because obviously it's your body's internal kind of like proper fuel that it almost should be using. And like the interesting statistic that I'd probably throw in there is that your brain uses, as you said, like it uses 25% of the calories that you like actually consume. And so it'd be interesting because those ketones, I would argue, are probably more efficient because they're already very digestible in your body. I would almost say that if you're running like that off the ketones, it's already very, like, 'cause your body literally it produces it. And so your body would be very readily able to utilize it, unlike how it has to break down your food, to like dissect it, put it into its constituent, and basically all of its constituent amino acids and all that sort of stuff. And whereas this, it's kind of already ready to like be utilized, and that would probably cause like your body to pretty much like, I would almost say that maybe your brain then goes from 25% to like maybe it only has to use 5% of those ketones. Who knows? Like, and I guess that's like the fact that it's running on such an efficient sort of like fuel would almost probably just make you just better in general.
No, and it makes me consider what this would be like if I was to just be carnivore all the time, right? And just consistently, because I'm an omnivore. I eat carbs, I eat vegetables, I eat meat. I have a very whole food based diet, and you know that.
Yeah.
But when I'm firing off ketones, there's a different type of clarity that comes with that. You can't have sourdough toast anymore, and you can't have yogurt and all these great things, right? And you're just restricted to meat, which isn't that terrible of a thing to be restricted to. I love meat.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where it definitely makes you consider like, wow, could I do a period of time where I just do a carnivore based diet and just
Exactly.
function completely off ketones and just see how I feel.
Yeah.
I've heard though it messes some people up.
Yeah.
Like I've heard that if you just jump straight into a carnivore diet, it can give you serious issues for, just that, the adjustment period, I guess you could say, that 1 to 2 weeks before you enter ketosis fully. you know.
Yeah.
But have you ever done any crazy, like, I know your diet's pretty standard. You're very whole food based as well,
Yeah.
like very protein heavy, obviously. But have you ever done anything outlandish?
Not particularly, nah, because like I typically only just don't mess with the diet because like like my nutrition, I pretty much make sure it's very similar to like just the performance of even like someone like yeah, Usain Bolt, where like he would legitimately before his 100-meter like sprint finals and all that, and like during his training for like the Olympics on like the tail end for the taper and all that, he would actually like only eat like chicken nuggets from like McDonald's.
That's
And
literally
it's
crazy.
and it's just because McDonald's like so kind of like reliable and all that, where he'd get his protein in, and it's literally just a bit of like protein from those chicken nuggets, and he
Yeah.
knew that because it's McDonald's, he just wouldn't get sick because he knew that like if he hired like some crazy, like full nutritionist to like do all his meals and like kind of track all the macros like and all that, he'd feel like all these like crazy whole food exogenous like like ingredients, like when they're all combined, it might like make him like somehow like this natural sort of ingredient might like get him sick,
Yeah,
like or
just
something.
interrupt his rhythm,
Yeah,
his consistent rhythm that he's focused on.
exactly.
Riley, could you look this up? Could you see if Usain? Can we fact check this? Make sure Usain Bolt was indeed eating chicken nuggets at the
'cause-
Olympics. Because I know you're not
Yeah,
lying,
'cause-
but I
'cause-
just want to show the
yeah.
people at home
'Cause it's
because that
fun.
is absolutely crazy, especially considering the level of nutrition that exists in sports now, and we see that with a lot of
Yeah.
these independent sports, like that don't have a big established organization like F1 and UFC. They all have like crazy
Yeah, nutrition
nutritional
departments,
because it's
yeah.
very
Very-
free. Whereas like if you're at a AFL club, they have a nutritionist at the club, right? You don't get to hire the nutritionist. You just come into the club,
Yeah,
and that's what that's who they have. But if you're a UFC fighter, if you're a Formula One driver, you've got the freedom to hire whoever you want, right? And that creates market demand, and that means that there's like these people like Gary Brecker and Andrew Huberman who are like the
Yeah.
goats of biohacking and physiotherapy
Exactly.
and all this stuff, right? Okay, is this real? So hold on. So Usain Bolt famously claimed to have consumed an estimated 1,000 McDonald's chicken nuggets during the 2008 Beijing Olympics. He reportedly ate 100 nuggets a day during his time there, as he felt the food in the Olympic Village was odd and preferred the familiarity of chicken nuggets. This love for chicken nuggets was further highlighted in his autobiography, Faster Than Lightning. That is off the chain.
Yeah, I know. Like, but
Because they cook those nuggets in seed oils,
know,
and there's all this
yeah.
like processing that goes on with the chicken, especially like white meat these days. It's it goes through a serious process. There's a lot of steps between the chicken at the farm and eating it on the dinner table, right?
100%.
And chicken nuggets are the biggest example of the most processed you can essentially get it, right?
Exactly.
And it's crazy that an athlete, like, it just shows how talented he was.
Yeah,
it just shows
100%.
that I think what will be really interesting is, and this kind of comes into like the gym thing, I guess, a little bit too, but these enhanced games, is Usain Bolt, how long is he the fastest man in the world for? And does someone using steroids go on ahead and break his records? Or is it going to be someone natural in the next Olympics, or, the natural, because records, we're getting better all the time. There's just advancements in medicine, in the way like we raise our children. People are getting better all the time, and eventually Usain Bolt's record will fall. But with this enhanced games and all this crazy stuff going on, in that world, it's crazy to think that someone enhanced could beat him. And then, what would happen if Usain Bolt was enhanced? Then it's kind of not fair,
Yeah, exactly.
But do you know anything about are you a big fan of the enhanced games or anything like that?
To be fair, like I don't really. Obviously, funnily enough, it's obviously a very contentious point in the fitness community, which is pretty funny. About like
That's why I knew we'd love talking about it.
And like, to be fair, like I think obviously it's great to kind of see like what really maybe at the highest kind of level what we're capable of, but I just don't really see like the point of like, because like this even goes back to exactly what I was saying like earlier, where I literally wouldn't feel very like accomplished like if I just took a bunch of gear and got big, and then like, or just increase my performance for like a tiny little like period of like maybe 21 days, like depending on how long you're competing for in the Olympics with your taper and all that, increase your performance for a very short period of time just because you're like blasting exogenous hormones and all that
Crazy amount of
like,
gear.
Yeah, and I just kind of I don't know. Yeah, I just don't feel that it's very like, to be fair, like I'm sure it's great for some of the athletes. Obviously, they've dedicated their lives to it, and so like they want to see like what can I like do with this extra boost or something like. But and obviously here's where it also falls a bit funny, right? Where you could almost say like there's probably people who are already on gear who are now going to the enhanced games and they're still on gear anyway. And like obviously it usually takes maybe about a couple years after the Olympics for people to get found out that
Because
they
the
were
testing catches up
exactly
and they do backlog testing. So they go
exactly
and get,
yeah
2012 records, test them out against the
exactly
technology we have today,
and
and bust people retrospectively, take their medals away.
exactly,
Right?
and that's what I mean. Where I kind of go like, imagine if there's just people going to the enhanced games and they're already on gear anyway, and it's just like, I mean,
Well, I think
yeah,
it's one of the things where a lot of people say that the enhanced games isn't fair because you're allowed to use steroids, right? But then, people who are big fans of the enhanced games could say the Olympics not fair
Yeah.
because those who have, there's a lot, this very well too. There's a lot of bioidentical steroids out there that, aren't detectable in testing that you can take for a specific amount of time that can be out
Yeah,
that can be out of your system within a
yeah,
certain window.
true.
And then you're still, when you're in the testing pool, you're all fine.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, and that kind of also speaks to the inequality of the Olympics a little bit. Whereas, a country like the US or Russia or, people that have been busted for cheating in
Yeah,
the
very
past,
capable.
right? They're very capable. They can get the doctors in, they can get the best chemicals. But that guy in Ethiopia that, he's coming to the Olympics for
Yeah.
the first time. It's the first ever time being on a plane.
Exactly.
He's not on anything. He can
Yeah.
barely get 8 hours of sleep and,
Yeah.
train properly and get his meals in
Yeah.
because he's just living life.
He's his own coach.
And so I think the enhanced games kind of, I understand your argument completely. I'm not for or against. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
pick a side.
Yeah.
But I think, a lot of people would make the argument that it actually evens out the playing field. And I think there's a mindset behind the enhanced games too, where it's, it's very like meathead-esque. Like,
Yeah.
like you're just blasting gear, getting
Yeah,
as big as
yeah.
possible. And you're just going to be pumping as much test, as much D-ball, as much trend as you
Yeah.
possibly can. So you can run for 10 seconds.
Yeah.
I think, that's a very like, naive view of what these performance
Yeah.
enhancers are.
'Cause it's
Like
not
if you
all
genuinely,
muscle.
if you
Yeah,
genuinely
exactly.
understand performance enhancing drugs, it's not about I'm going to inject this and my
And then you
muscles
get
going to get big.
yeah.
There's drugs like EPO that greatly improve your cardiovascular capacity,
Yeah.
right? They increase the amount of red blood cells that you can produce, and then therefore you have more oxygen in your blood. You're more ready to go.
Yeah,
You're going to be hyped up, energized,
Exactly.
and fighters have been popped for this in the past, all the time. It
Yeah.
happens, and something like that in an endurance sport, who knows like what that does to people's times? If people are all on EPO
Yeah.
and they've got blood transfusions
Yeah.
and
Oh.
IVs, like who
They're in
knows
a
what the
hyperbaric
capacity,
chamber.
the capacity of human
Yeah.
potential is. And I think one thing that's definitely true, whether you're for or against these enhanced games, is that because steroids and these performance enhancers have been illegal for so long, it's restricted a lot of the research and a lot of the studies that could be done on the potential benefits of this and the practicalities. Because people use like a lot of people use these recreationally, right?
Yeah.
And they're trying to do a huge deadlift or swim 50 meters really fast or
Yeah.
throw a discus super far, right? They're pretty comical, but these research chemicals, these performance enhancers could have great benefits for the broader public, not who
Yeah.
are physically, demanding a lot from themselves, but just in everyday life. And the research has been halted on that because it's been illegal for so
Yeah,
long. And
very
this enhanced
true.
games might just
Bring it
bring a
to the
little
front,
exactly,
yeah.
just brings it to the forefront. And and I just think there's a lot more research that could be done on these things.
That is like I actually really love that entire point there because it's a very very good sort of like topic just on the fact that if you even look at kind of like probably the best way I could describe it was even from like a video that I saw a while ago where it was a very good point and it's exactly the same as yours where you can learn a lot even from looking at potential very strong muscle points in certain people. Like obviously for myself, like obviously yeah, my shoulders and my lats are probably like the most predominant, and just because I have the shape like that almost makes like the actual sort of physique in general, it just like pops because I don't even think that my like arms and stuff are like really insane, but it's just because when you have the shape, even if you don't have like much direct muscle size, it just makes you so much more like people kind of like they're like, oh, fire! Like no one really, because it's very different. Like where not many. There's lots of people who have muscle,
Yes.
but it's not really shaped kind of like very well. Like they're kind of like maybe just only big arms and that's about it, and it just doesn't really give you like a very good kind of like base of like shape and all that, and like that's kind of like where you can learn a lot, I think, from actual people who develop, because I think my side delts grew very easily. I think that's like even though I train them very hard and like very kind of dedicated, I probably do pretty much exactly what most people do. Like probably there's a bit of variation, but
You're very specific when it
yeah,
comes to your
I am.
technique.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like I know in your head you're probably thinking, oh, everyone does this, but you're very
Yeah.
meticulous about your workouts. And we could talk
Yeah.
about that all day. Like
Exactly.
every time we work out, I feel like I'm learning something new with you.
Yeah.
About some exercise I never knew about, or about, you know, certain type of leverage that you can get on a certain type of equipment. Like, you know, you're tuned into it, and you know, as you've said before, it's all based on just facts that are sort of undeniable. You know?
Exactly. Yeah. You just need to have kind of like just enough of like a base where you can kind of go, yeah, like that's definitely not correct. And as long as you have like enough of a base, like you can still have like and even probably another big like variable is even just like the execution, like where you're just saying like where probably don't execute it similar to other people, where like obviously you could argue like a lot of people like don't have the intensity, and that's like one of the biggest proximity to failure. Like that's one of the biggest sort of like drivers, and that's why I train probably very hard to the point where I do a ridiculous amount of like length and partials and all that. And I always did that, and that was even before. This is the reason why I think that like I managed to get like a good physique as well. Like because like I like to say I was ahead of the time, yeah, ahead of the times. But like yeah, like and I certainly learnt a lot from Alex Leonidas, who's
Okay.
like who's a YouTuber. He's very clued into. He's probably one of the best dudes I've ever seen from like a practical standpoint, and being able to deliver the information well, and then also just be like a pioneer. And the reason why I love him as well is he does everything, where he doesn't just do, you know, your weightlifting and the bodybuilding and all that. He is like a pioneer of all the fronts of fitness, where he's like very kind of still into like having good fitness for like the cardio standpoint. He's like been on the shows, like for obviously bodybuilding shows, and competed. And he's also an absolute pioneer of like being calisthenics sort of person.
Wow.
And like he's ridiculous at calisthenics, where like only recently I'm pretty sure I saw that he did a 205-pound pull up, and it was with I think it was with his regular kind of pretty standard grip. Like
Yeah.
I think it was like a slightly wide neutral one,
Okay.
which isn't even his strongest.
How much does he
pull.
weigh?
He weighs, I'm pretty sure at the moment, I think when he did it, he said he was 160. I think he was
160
165
pounds or 165 pounds?
I
Okay.
think it was
okay.
165 pounds, and like obviously that's like another reason why, like, because he's also so light.
So what's that? That's like about 80 kilos for people watching.
Oh,
Right. 165 pounds. What's that?
Oh no, 165 would probably actually be around like more close to maybe 60, because I'm
No, 165 pounds. Surely not. Surely
No,
not. 155 pounds is 71. And so
I'm
165, Riley, look it up. Come
yeah,
on.
I'm about 175 pounds, and that means that I'm about 75 kilos.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so he's 165, and so that means that he's probably 65 kilos.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, he's probably close to 70. He's like kind of
Okay. So he's not super big.
yeah, no,
No,
like,
not
not
a big
heavy at
dude.
all. But
Wow. And he was able to get 100 kilos up.
it's because
Okay. 165 is about 75. Yeah.
and so like
So what did you say? How much did you say you weigh, Carl?
Yeah.
175 pounds.
yeah, because I checked on the scale, like I do it all the time, and I guess I'm pretty much that's a bit weird.
Yeah, I think no. That's how I'm like thinking. 175
yeah.
is about 80. Just because the only reason I know anything about pounds is through fighting, is through weight class.
Yeah.
Right, and I know
It's
that,
weird
and I know that the
because-
155 pound division is 71 kilos, and then I know the welterweight division, which is
Oh,
170. What's that? 170 is like, yeah, I think it's like 77, 78.
Yeah.
But I only know it through fighting, and then
Yeah.
Volkanovski fight because Volkanovski's 145 pounder.
Yeah.
Right, but he fights at 66 kilos, which is what I've competed at that weight too.
Yeah.
So, you know, like
so much fun.
Yeah,
Like,
because
and that's the only reason I know anything about this conversion.
but that's funny because like even on my scale, like I'm pretty sure it was telling me like yeah I'm 100 and like I think the last time I checked I was like 170 or like 175 like when
Mm.
I but to be fair I think when I looked at it last I was 175 and that was when I was very close to 80. I was like 78 kilos.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, so yeah.
Fair enough.
But I think I've actually cut. I think even you noticed it a while ago. I think I've actually like I'm quite lean at the moment, where I'm actually getting veins on each side of my shoulder now,
That's
which
crazy.
is quite like
Crazy.
yeah, which is quite like usually my left one's quite predominant,
Well,
but
for the people at home, because I know a lot about your exercise regime, but for the people at home, what does the week look like in your shoes from an exercise standpoint? How many times do you go in the gym? What are you doing? What's the cardio regime
Yeah.
look like? Break it down for everybody.
yeah. So typically, like at the moment, like I am of the firm believer of not really like I don't like obviously splits are fantastic. Like obviously doing sort of splits, but I've literally just created my own split. Like and it's tailored and it changes all the time specifically for my like goals. But I'll always keep it the same for long enough so that I can still get the results that I want. Because obviously, if you are someone who's doing like say you're doing push pull legs and you're constantly just changing like the order and like you're missing like your push session all the time or like you're missing your leg session all the time, you're just not really gonna like get the result. Especially if you even like you spend 2 weeks and you're doing a particular like exercise in that. Say you're doing like the leg press or whatever.
Yep.
If you do leg press for 2 weeks and then you switch it out for like a squat or whatever, it's just like nah, like you just keep the leg press in for like at least maybe 2 months and then get the results. So you sort of like increasing the load for the progressive overload for that, and then from there, like that's where like if you didn't make any results for that full kind of 2 months or whatever, then I would say yeah maybe like change it or look at the way you're performing the leg press or like look at a bunch of other things that might have been causing you not to get the results. But going into like what I do, yeah, I don't really do too much of like an actual legit very very
Structured.
commercially available split that
Yeah,
you would
gotcha.
say. Like and so I like just focus on all the stuff that I specifically want to like target like in of itself. And so like the Monday like might even sort of be me just doing like a full cardio session where I'm literally like on the bike, do it at around like maybe six. Think I'm next Monday I think I'm going up to 16 resistance like on the bike,
Okay.
which is pretty heavy, and so it kind of like it doesn't really move very quick.
Yeah,
but like
fair.
but I always do progressive overload where I keep a cadence of 70.
Okay.
I pretty much always keep the cadence of 70 and then I'll move it up like one each
Gradually.
like sort of week pretty much.
Yeah.
And now I'm probably at like 16 and I do 16 for like about 5 minutes at a cadence of like 70 on the
Okay.
bike. And but yeah, like that's pretty much what I do like on the Monday, and then I'll also typically do like all the kind of rotator cuff stuff.
Okay.
I'll pretty much do like every single variation that I kind of know sort of works for me very well. And then from there, like any sort of like little ones, I might even do some stuff for my rear delts, because while I'm doing the rotator cuff stuff on both this, that you actually are kind of in a pretty good position to like quickly like hit the rear delts and all
Get them
that.
going. Get a little pump.
Exactly.
Why not?
Like,
Why
why
get a little
not?
pump?
And the rear delts are such a small muscle, obviously very easy to recover from, and all that sort of stuff. And then so you may as well, and it's all obviously because it's such a small muscle anyway, you're gonna very much need to give it a lot of stimulus and train it very frequently in order to hit it as well and actually get good results with your rear delt. And from there, like literally the Tuesday might even be typically my Tuesdays I'll actually do a lot of forearm stuff where
Gotcha.
that's like a big target for me. So like right now, especially as well as bringing up the biceps, like I'm also doing a bit more focus on my like lateral and medial head of the triceps. And so I'm trying to stay away from doing like, I'll still hit the long head with specific movements.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to like, because typically you'll hit your lateral and medial head more when you're actually extending like the arm and like there's actually the two actions at the joint, Whereas you hit the long head a lot better when your arm is like completely locked, like your humerus is locked, and you're only extending like this, and you actually don't even have to extend to the point where you do this, because when you fully extend like that,
The
you'll
tension
notice.
comes off.
Yeah, exactly, because my shoulder has to like adjust in order to finish that thing. Like you can't actually kind of get full here and then, because as soon as you go to full range, your shoulder kind of like moves out,
Yeah.
especially under load. Because obviously then you have to manage the load stability as well to fully lock out.
Yes.
And that's why to hit your long head as well as you can, you need to kind of obviously get it in and then just don't extend all the way, because we already know that we do a lot of your press downs. You're always doing full lockout when you're doing your push downs,
Yes.
because you wouldn't skip the lockdown like portion when you're doing your push downs. And so you can like accommodate skipping it up here to target long head more by just leaving it a bit short, because you're hitting it so hard, the actual push down itself, to lock the elbows when you're doing your regular push downs. And that's what you kind of like fill in the gaps almost. And that you can get a lot more of that lateral and medial head contraction and like results for that by pretty much, yeah, you have to, in order to hit the lateral and medial, you've got to kind of like to emphasize that, because you're obviously still going to hit your long head pretty much with like you'll still hit all the heads. And that's what obviously people need to remember, like where even for upper chest movements, you're not hitting like only your upper chest, you're hitting your whole chest the whole time, but you are emphasizing your upper. And it'll be very kind of like minimal and all that. Like it'll just be a tiny percentage more of like the upper chest. And like when you're hitting that lateral medial head, you want to like actually be doing it in a way where you're extending the arm and the elbow at the same time for like your shoulder sort of as well. But then for that long head, you want to do it in a position where, oddly enough, I actually think I experienced the best long head gain, surprisingly, when I was, because my right, I think you already knew, I think you already know this, that my right was a lot bigger than my left, especially on the long head at the back. And it was like, I don't know how it happened. Like,
Well, do you think it has something to do with the injury though?
it probably
it
did.
has to.
It
It
probably
has to.
did. It's the reason why my shoulder, I think, looks different as well.
Yeah, because
Like
for so long, like
Yeah.
when you did break your collarbone, it was, you know, you were
it
not the
it's
same
locked.
person
Yeah.
left to
Oh,
right.
it wa-
right? You were
yeah.
jacked on this side,
Yeah,
and then like super
nothing.
skinny on this side.
Like
Yeah.
honestly, I would almost say Riley, like you could probably even pull up like the bloody picture, which would be funny, like of like, because I still have some where I was like in the mirror and I like did that, and it's literally massive. And then like nothing. It's
absolutely
like nothing. Like
that collarbone injury, it cooks you though. Like I have a
Oh.
couple friends that have done their collarbone, a few playing soccer even, and like
Yeah.
they even struggle to just be able to put their hands above their head. They're never not able to bench the same, not able to shoulder press the same. Praise God that that's never happened to me, but praise God that you've been able to recover the way you have.
Yeah.
Like
Oh.
you essentially, you're back to normal. Like
Oh,
you're absolutely
absolutely.
fine. You're not restricted in your movement at all. And so, and
Yeah.
that's credit to obviously the good work done by the doctors at the time, but also a credit to your dedication to the recovery
Yeah,
protocol.
to kind of
because it's all about the rehabilitation. Like I have so many
Absolutely.
friends, like especially in like the jiu-jitsu community, there's like this big thing that like, you know, rehabbing your injuries is, you know, not like, you know, it's the weak thing to do.
Yeah.
It's for bitches or whatever, you know, not doing proper
Half your
rehab.
arm got
But
snapped
yeah,
off.
so people are doing like, you know, ACLs, MCLs, and then like 4 weeks later they're back, like, you know, rolling with you, and you're like, bro, like what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Why are you back here?
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, I'm on some crazy peptide or something, and you're like, come on, bro, just do the rehab like normal.
Yeah.
You know, but they love it. They love it. Like I think, you know, that's one of the things that you're so knowledgeable about is those like recovery rehab exercises. Like even that you're on Monday, you're doing a lot of that shoulder mobility work, a lot of that rotator cuff, you know, work, and that is crucial to be able to lift heavy loads when you're doing bench press, when you're deadlifting, when you're squat, everything. It's everything.
Exactly.
If your shoulders are cooked, you can't do shit.
Oh, 100%. Like, and it's interesting because you hit the nail on the head where pretty much like, obviously you have to understand the actual kind of rotator cuff sort of exercise and all that, but you also have to kind of find for yourself, because sort of me telling you is like not really going to be able to actually obviously do it for you basically, because you need to kind of understand. Obviously, there's very specific kind of movements where you're kind of doing this sort of one here, and you're kind of coming out to the like do this one here, and you want to like do very light loads at the beginning because it's very easy for people to kind of start doing this, and then it becomes almost a rear delt slash side delt slash tricep extension.
Yeah, because you're just using your leverage to get it done, right? When you
Exactly.
really should just lower the weight and focus on form.
Yeah.
And that just comes with discipline and with experience, right? Like we've all been new
Exactly.
to the gym, and you're just ego lifting, doing
Yeah.
doing terrible form, and you just ego lifting
And
and
you
trying
have
to
no
pull a
idea.
whole bunch. Yeah, but
Yeah.
over time, you eventually come to the realization, like, okay, I actually got to slow down.
Yeah.
I've got to lower the weight. I've got to focus on form, and that's the only way that I can sustainably do this for a long period of time. Because that's all it is. Like that's all. Like when it comes to gym, that's the training. It's the ultimate training room because that's
Yeah.
where you prepare for life outside of it. You know, it's
Exactly.
not the main event. You know,
Yeah,
like you're not
100%.
doing the fight in the gym.
Yeah.
You're not running on the AFL pitch in the like in the gym. It's the hub where you prepare.
Yeah.
I think this is something I wanted to ask about you too. You do a lot of training and you train harder than most people I know, but you're not as goal orientated as others. Like you're not necessarily training for something. You're more training because you just love training and it's a
Yeah.
passion of yours. And you're so knowledgeable about it and you're so
Yeah.
passionate
So
about
much
it.
training
And
hard.
yeah, it's a lifestyle rather than a destination for you. But is there something that you're training for deep down?
That-
And that
that-
doesn't have to be like an event. It can be something.
That's
spiritual.
that's a very good question because I would almost say along the lines very similar almost to like even someone like Alex Leonidas that I mentioned before, like where I'm almost just trying to train to be like the most capable kind of like version pretty much that I can be, and I was obviously very good and very kind of like competent at doing like very good kind of like runs like and all that, and like 5K runs was like kind of like what I typically sort of did.
Yep.
And I did that at like a high level, but yeah, I kind of like went away from that because I knew that like I needed something else after like that neck injury, because I think I've already showed you that
Yeah,
photo where
yeah,
I had
we
that
talked
neck
about it.
injury. I had the things like basically on me from the hospital, and I took a photo like of myself, and that was like one of the earliest photos like before, and you could see that I was like obviously like lean and all that, but yeah, like that was like the day pretty much that I was like, you know, and that I think that was
This
on,
running stuff.
yeah,
I don't know if I'm going to continue with it.
I know, like, and I obviously, like, I was always going to continue with it. It's just that I needed something else to protect me, because I almost had 2 times in a row where I was like rushed in like an ambulance almost.
That's crazy.
Like, and I was like in the hospital and all that, like where dude basically like elbowed me in the neck, like when I didn't even have the ball, like, and the ball literally hadn't even made it to me yet.
It's
Like,
so crazy. It's like, because, you know, when I think of soccer, I don't think of physical contact at all. I more think of people faking physical contact.
yeah,
But it's,
exactly,
so,
very
it's
true.
so different, you know, like on TV or in the professional leagues than it is on the weekend. Like on the weekend, it's far more
Yeah.
physical than it is on TV, than it
Yeah.
is in those professional
Exactly.
organizations. It's crazy, right? And so many of my friends have been injured. Like a lot of my friends, especially uni mates, are big soccer fans, big soccer players too.
Yeah.
And they've been injured, you know, just in like, you know, nonchalant sort of circumstances. Like they'll just
Oh.
run for the ball, something happens, they fall over, someone falls on top of them,
Yeah,
bang,
gone.
arm, collarbone, leg, this,
gone.
that, whatever, you know. And it's crazy because especially in AFL, like in AFL, that's a very injury prone sport too, especially ACLs. Like ACLs seem to go in AFL all the time, even in you know professional leagues, and you know in jiu-jitsu and in MMA too, ACLs are a big one. But you know when it comes to martial arts, there's so many different things that you can do. Like so many people have problems with their discs in their back, in their shoulders, in their knees, in their ankles. Whereas AFL, it's specifically the knees, like those
Yeah.
ACLs that kills players. And it's a year recovery. It's a year on the sideline. They miss a whole season,
Yeah.
maybe even more. And once you do it once,
Do you come
there's-
back?
yeah,
you
like,
know?
are you going to come back? Are you going to do it again? It's
The
a higher
same,
likelihood to do it
yeah.
again. This is the thing. This is actually one of the most impressive things about Khabib. He had 2 ACL surgeries essentially back to back. Like early in his career, after he beat Rafael dos Anjos, he like tore his ACL in the practice room, had to do a whole year on the sidelines, tried to come back, tore his ACL again, same one,
Yeah.
did another year of rehab, and in that second year of rehab, he was like, like he was talking to his dad, like, am I going to quit? Should I like give up? Like, all this sort of thing. And he kept going, and he kept pursuing, and he's one of the greatest of all time.
And he's literally record like
I know.
29-0.
29, no, he's the GOAT. He's one of the
Insane.
GOATs, right?
Yeah.
And it just shows that, like Volkanovski said in his most recent fight, adversity is a privilege,
Oh,
and that
absolutely.
develops your character to turn you into the champion you need to
Oh,
be.
absolutely. Like even just even if you like switch that up to like from like a success and kind of monetary standpoint, it's kind of like where you sort of like get into the position of like if you have those hard times like on the way to success, like that is much more important for you to become that sort of person that you need to become there from those challenges and those adversities. Like, and that will cause like you to like, because if you were just given all of that success like at the beginning, you would not really have become that more capable and like and develop the skills that to the point of where like even just someone like that's very sort of big that I like see all the time. Alex Hormozi is very big in like the online space about entrepreneurship.
He's always
specifically.
wearing those little nose
the nose
strips too.
strips.
Yeah.
And like the big one is that
He loves them.
and he talks about the fact that like honestly like he's lost everything he like all the money like literally that he's like, had he's lost it all 3 times and he's had like a ridiculous amount like during those times where I'm pretty sure he like lost millions almost on each occasion.
Wow.
And it was all because of like just small little mistakes. Like, and it's mistakes that most people would very easily make because it was mistakes where he lost millions just because he trusted the wrong person. And it takes a very, very capable person who may have even seen that before, who's maybe been burnt before, to have seen what maybe Hormozi didn't at the time. And,
Exactly.
but
And that's why
honestly, yeah.
experience is unparalleled. That's the one thing that like, is a really big detractor from this podcast. I only just turned 23 yesterday. I don't have a lot of human experience to share with people. And by virtue of only living 23 years, I haven't made the mistakes necessary to develop the knowledge to potentially entertain an audience, because I'm going to be talking and they're going to be like, what's this naive kid know about anything? Like, he hasn't even lived any life, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's like, it is a good argument, because just like you're saying, you only really learn from experience, especially guys. Guys only learn the hard way.
Yeah.
It's only after you crash the car that you realize you should be going the speed limit. It's only after you injure yourself in the gym when you realize you should have taken a rest day and not gone so hard. It's the same. It's that kind of like, like
you just
masculine
push it,
mentality
you just do it,
that makes you push yourself, and it gets you in trouble all the time. And it's only through experience that you're able to, recognize that within yourself, slow things down and address it, right? And so that's like, and I think, but that's one of the big things about this podcast. I don't know if people will be able to connect with it because they might see it as just an inexperienced kid talking about things he doesn't understand, which is true, which is like, it's kind of true,
very valid.
and they would be right to make that assumption. And I guess we'll find out if that's going to manifest itself, but we'll see. I think experience is one of the pillars of life, and that's why a lot of the people I want to have on the show are going to be older people who have great stories and great wisdom to share.
Exactly.
And I think it's experience is an asset, and that's why experiences in themselves, whatever they may be, valuable experiences like travel and athletic accomplishment or academic achievement, all things like where you're pushing yourself, even just going to the gym and being disciplined with your diet and your nutrition and your sleep, just being tuned into life itself, it can enhance your character in ways you can't imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I was even gonna ask, I guess, like a big sort of question just on, I guess, even just probably one of your favorite topics, like the MMA sort of side, like what really sort of like drew you sort of at the beginning, like to start training, and when did you specifically start training, and like even just from like the perspective like now, like how do you look at yourself like when you kind of started, and like now, and how capable you are now, like what's kind of like changed like in that time that it's given you such like not even just the skills with your hands and like being able to like fight well, like but what's it even given you like kind of like mentally?
Damn, that's a good question. That's a really good question. I think from the start, being as vulnerable as I can be, is I was always small. So I always wanted to be able to defend myself. I was always like, I would find myself getting into situations and I was like, I need to know more than this. I'm vulnerable right now,
Yeah.
and I'm only little. Like, I need to be able to defend myself, and then it just progressed from there. I think that innate desire to be able to fend for myself,
capable, yeah.
drove a passion into mixed martial arts, and I've essentially fallen in love with it ever since. I've been doing it for years now at so many different gyms, all the different disciplines too, from jiu-jitsu to Muay Thai, being able to go overseas and practice these things. It's a lifelong passion of mine, and as you said, I can talk about it all
Oh,
day,
exactly.
and I will. That's what this
Yeah.
podcast,
Exactly.
this podcast is going to turn into an MMA chat pretty soon, and hopefully we can even pull up some UFC events live here and have a bit of a party going on. Get some more
absolutely.
microphones, get some more
Exactly.
cameras, turn it into a bit of an event. We did a couple of test episodes of the podcast. Harry came over and he was like, listen, we could do a great poker event here and just have a ball. And ideas for this thing are limitless, but not to go on that tangent, to bring us back to the conversation at hand. I think what MMA's taught me is like when you're, it's hard to explain because MMA teaches you different lessons than any other skill, because when you're learning something for the first time, as you said, there's those peaks and troughs in the learning process, and during those real lows, that's when a lot of people give up. The thing about martial arts is that low lasts for so long. You're so bad for so long, and you're getting beat up every single day you're going in, and you're still committing yourself to it. Like, I remember when I first put everything together, when I stopped, training jiu-jitsu and training Muay Thai and training boxing and, the wrestling all separately, and I put them together. For a year and a half, I was getting my ass whooped every day, right? And then eventually it all just clicks, because it's very hard. Like when you're been doing Muay Thai for, 2 years, let's say, to mix in the wrestling in something that you've been so strikingly heavy focused on is tough. And so I think it's that learning curve that takes so long to get over, which develops that mindset of persistence, determination, drive, and, overall just discipline, I guess. But I think more than that, fighting gives you a respect for life. Like, I think, a lot of people see the UFC and go like, this is the most violent thing
crack.
of all
Yeah,
time. Like, I do not want to watch this. And I can completely understand that argument, because it is violence. And I do think violence is bad. Like when it isn't in a sport context, I'm like, people know that I absolutely love the UFC, absolutely love MMA, training it, talk and breathe it. Like, it's my favorite, right? But unnecessary violence outside of sport, I hate it.
Exactly.
I couldn't hate anything more than that, really. But I couldn't love anything more than sport, martial arts.
Exactly.
And it really is an art. It opens you up to a different perspective. It's an art in which you're able to express yourself. That it's so creative. Especially MMA, it's so creative. It really is a tool of expression. It's not necessarily just about technique, just about cardio and all those things. This is genuinely how you're expressing yourself, just like an artist does on a canvas, just like a poet does in a piece of poetry, just like a musician in a song. It's the same.
Exactly.
It really is a form of an expression, and that's what makes it different to so many other sports too. It really is a living, breathing art form, and no one person has the perfect formula, and everyone falls in the end, and everyone's career ends the same way, going out on your back, right? And so no one knows the secret. And that's why developing like who's the greatest of all time, getting a pound for pound list is so hard, because the styles are so everyone's so unique, and everyone has their own characteristics and their own style, which is the best part about mixed martial arts. Is the best thing about martial arts in general, that it's a unique passion that you can use to develop physically, but also spiritually and mentally too.
The other thing that I really wanted to ask as well, like same related to MMA, is that like describe to me like in a very sort of like kind of detailed sort of like I guess choreographed kind of like routine almost, like what are the like emotions and kind of like the things that you're just feeling like kind of physically like and internally before, like, because I know that you've had many fights, and like what is kind of like that lead up to the fight, especially even when you're cutting weight and all that and you're kind of feeling like not so good.
The cutting weight's easily the worst. Like, that's easily the worst. It's way harder than doing the actual fight itself. But when it comes to actually before the fight, I'm nervous, just like I imagine everybody else is nervous. Like, if you're not nervous, something's wrong with you, I really think. But those nerves, like John Jones talks about this, like those butterflies align within you and you are able to use that negative, like not negative, but that nervous energy to perform your best. And like, you know, every like a lot of fighters talk about this, and a lot of fighters kind of take that stance of, you know, I'm too manly to be nervous. Like I'm not scared of anybody, but it's just natural to be nervous going into, you know, essentially a life and death situation. As far as you're concerned, you could get knocked out and you're about to knock somebody else out, you know? So I think, you know, people focus on that aspect so much, and there's so many fears in fighting too, because people think about, you know, oh, you know, I could get knocked out. And if, you know, a regular person thinking of, you know, boxing or MMA or anything, their number one fear is getting knocked out. They don't want to get knocked out and embarrassed in front of the world. Right. But there's a lot of other fears that real fighters face, which is, you know, the risk of injury, the risk of running out of cardio. That's one thing that really makes people retire. When they know that they can't go 3 rounds anymore or 5 rounds anymore, that's when people get really scared of taking fights, because you see it all the time from professional fighters in the UFC. They just run out of gas. They go too hard in the first 2 rounds. They haven't done the training in camp leading up to the fight, and it gets to the 3rd or 4th round, and they're like a shell of themselves, and it just takes a couple shots and they go down, and that's the end of the fight. They didn't get knocked out. They finished themselves. They literally they didn't train hard enough. They didn't cut weight properly. Whatever happened, they ran out of gas, and I think that's what fighters fear almost more than getting knocked out. Like, I hope I don't run out of gas, because I know that if I do run out of gas, I'm cooked, you know? And all fighters are. If you don't have a good cardio, no matter how good your technique is, if you're completely exhausted by halfway through the 2nd round, you're going to get finished. You know, it's just too many things, you know, eventually your opponent's going to take an opportunity to get you out of there. Because, you know, and when you fatigue, your technique's not as good, your hands are down, you're sloppy, you're labored in your movements, you lean one side, you lean the other, bang, you're gone. You know, it's all it takes. It's a sport of inches, and you got to be really sound with your cardio. And I think that's what people fear more than getting knocked out.
Like what next question would probably be, what's something like you reckon that like within the UFC is like a big kind of like misconception first that like beginners don't really understand, that like, you know, very well as a fighter yourself, and what's something that maybe even very experienced people like yourself in the UFC kind of maybe overlook?
Damn, that's good questions. Those are good questions. I think from the casuals point of view, you know, like the ground game's tough. You know, everyone can understand striking and getting hit in the face or getting kicked in the head. The ground game, a lot of people don't know what's going on. You know, I'll have friends over to watch the UFC, and as soon as it goes to the ground, they're not even interested in watching, because as far as they're concerned, like nothing can even happen there. Like a lot of people don't even know about like basic jiu-jitsu moves, like a rear naked. A lot of people know like a headlock, like a rear naked choke. But as soon as you see someone choke someone out with their legs for the first time, as soon as you see someone lock in on a triangle and starts, you're like, what's going on? Is he choking him out with his legs? You know, because people don't know jiu-jitsu, right? But that's one of the most common moves in the sport. You know, so I think the ground game is very, very like under recognized by people who are just, you know, like low key paying attention. Right. Ooh, something that even people who are seasoned experts, who are professionals, that I could provide insight on. I think, man, this is tough. You know what I think, you know, I've started to come around to more. The athletes themselves, their personality shapes how like entertaining they are, but not just from like the social media gimmick sort of stuff they do online, but their attitude to fighting. Like a fighter's attitude to fighting is almost as important as any of the other aspects. Like if you look at the real warriors of the UFC, like if you look at Dustin Poirier, Max Holloway, like Khabib back in the day, people who were always disciplined, who like lived and died by the sword. Like you look at like Dustin Poirier's most recent fight, like he was going to go out in a cardboard box. He doesn't care. Like he honestly will fight until he dies, and that's the thing that really attracts the fans. That's what really sells. You know,
exactly.
And this is the thing that I think, you know, Sean Strickland talks about this a lot. Like he'll get on the mic and he'll be like, you know, like to the death, all this kind of stuff, but his fighting style isn't as to the death as other people's fighting styles. It's very jabbed, it's very protective, right? I'm not, you know, throwing shade on anybody. And Sean has a great fighting style. He's a great fighter and a champion at that. But when you look at real warriors who are to the death, that is what really sells the tickets. And I think it's not a measurable characteristic of
Yeah,
fighting. Like
exactly.
you can't be like, oh, this person has this much heart and this person has another. You know, it's very hard to quantify. But I think that's what I really connect with when I see people laying it all out on the line, a complete surrender to whatever happens in the octagon. That is the most exciting for me. And two guys who are willing, who you know are going to like compete in that
Yeah,
way.
really.
That's always the most exciting fight. Because a lot of times you got to fight and it's kind of like, you know, the script's already written. You know, one guy's maybe more motivated than the other guy. He's maybe a little bit older. He's maybe too young. It's kind of like, you know, there's a lot of factors that go into it that can, you know, create like preconceived notions about the fight. But, you know, I think that willpower and that desire to win when you have two fighters like that, like Dustin Poirier and Max Holloway are going to fight in like 2 months.
Yeah, BMF,
That's two guys where you know they're literally going to die in the ring if they have to, and they're going to give it their absolute all, right? Charles Oliveira versus Ilia Topuria, another amazing, great matchup where you go, like, I think Topuria wins that fight, but from a heart point of view, like you couldn't ask for two guys with more heart in the UFC, especially recent Charles Oliveira. Like Charles Oliveira of old, like, you know, he was known for quitting and giving up a lot.
Suppose
but
I've heard,
now he's the GOAT. He's one of my favorite fighters. And to see him fight Topuria and probably get knocked out hurts so much. But you know, it's the thing. Topuria, I think Islam and Topuria are the two best fighters in the world right now. And we could talk about MMA for ages and ages and ages. And the fact that JDM, even though I love him, you know, God bless Australia, he broke the timeline. You know, it was going to be Islam versus Topuria. He now beats Bilal, and now Islam's moving up. And I hope we still get to see that Islam Topuria fight, because from a, you know, artist perspective, those two are the best personifications of martial arts in its true expressive form. You know, like you have someone who's so wrestling dominant, who's been training it for so long. He's so technical. The best grapplers can't match him in technique. And then you have Ilia Topuria, who's a striking master, who also has an amazing ground game. Both very complete fighters. And that really is the match of all matches, in my opinion. Like, you know, in my, because, you know, I've only been a fan of mixed martial arts since I really got into this, maybe, you know, 6-7 years ago, right? And over that course of time, I've got to see all these great champions, all these great legacies being left. But I can't think of a time where I've been more excited for a fight. Islam versus Ilia, it's what I'm really excited to see. People talk about John Jones, Tom Aspinall. I don't think that's going to happen. John Jones ain't fighting Tom Aspinall. I think, you know, John Jones probably goes down with an injury in a couple of weeks, and then he goes, look, I'm retired, and that'll be his exit from the sport. Because if you wanted to fight Tom, I think they would have already had that deal
had
now.
it done.
And John Jones, he's an incredible champion, the greatest of all time by a lot of people's metrics, and he's definitely in my, you know, top 5, Mount Rushmore, whatever you want to say. And he is the GOAT. But I don't think he's fighting Tom Aspinall. He's 38. Tom Aspinall's 32. Tom Aspinall is one of the best heavyweights we've ever seen. And, you know, Tom Aspinall is maybe one of the, apart from John Jones, because John Jones isn't really a heavyweight. He's a heavyweight. He's a light heavyweight that's come up. But Tom Aspinall is a legitimate big boy, a legit heavyweight who, and one of the first, you know, one of the first that's well-rounded. He not only strike, he's good on the ground. He's, you know, he's fast, he's nimble. You know, he's got a great wrestling base, great jiu-jitsu base. He's submitted a lot of guys, but then he finishes a lot of guys with his hands too. He's a boxing master as well. And as you said, his speed in the heavyweight division is unparalleled. No one has that type of speed in the heavyweight division. So, you know, and you know, if John Jones doesn't end up fighting him, it looks like we'll probably get Cyril Gane versus Tom Aspinall, which will be a great striking battle. You know, but I think Tom Aspinall probably takes him down and hits him anyway. You know, so I think Tom Aspinall is the best heavyweight in the world. I think it's hard to make it's hard to make a point for anybody else.
He hasn't even gone past the first round, has he?
I saw a video of Tom Aspinall trying to explain to like somebody that he's the best heavyweight in the world and he's the undisputed champ, and he pulled up a list of the top 10 rankings and he literally went name by name, and he was like, Volkov submitted him in the first 2 minutes of the fight. Tybura knocked him out in the first round. Curtis Blades knocked him out in the first round. And he's just going through the whole top, the whole top 10 of the UFC, and he beat like 7 of them all in the first round. And you're like, this is insane. It's
Yeah.
unparalleled. And the fact that this division's being held up and Tom Aspinall's wasting some of his
Yeah.
prime years is an absolute tragedy. And 'cause he might be one of the best fighters, heavyweight fighters of all
ever.
time.
Yeah.
You know, and we could have seen him fight 2 times now.
Exactly,
You know,
yeah.
since we've been waiting.
The crazy thing is that because I even remember just like seeing recently, the John Jones against John Jones even beat Cyril Gahn easily.
Easily.
Like
But
easily, like he
Cyril
got him
Gahn-
in some weird like front sort of
Guillotine
naked
sort of choke.
yeah, and he
Yeah.
just tapped like because I think his neck was just kind of getting bent forward too much, but like yeah, but that's the crazy thing because like imagine Tom against Cyril Gahn, like wouldn't that be even quicker?
Well,
Almost?
both John, like when it comes to ground skills, I think like that would be a very tough match to judge. Who has better ground game, Tom or John Jones? Because they're both amazing. Like John Jones has a bunch of submissions on his record. Like Tom Aspinall, his father originally taught him jiu-jitsu from the age of 6 and has been his coach ever since. So that's what he
Yeah.
grew up doing. And I think, the most credentialed MMA fighter of all time who has a great ground game versus this young, hungry prospect who's, been doing jiu-jitsu since he was born, that is a really compelling fight.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't
Yeah,
think so.
same. I don't
But-
know.
But Dana
Yeah.
White, we could pull up 100 clips of Dana White saying, fight's almost done. Just, both John's agreed, Tom's agreed. It looks like it's coming out. Though I saw an interview with Tom Aspinall today, actually. It doesn't sound like it's happening.
Yeah.
It's not happening. But hopefully in the future we'll get Islam and Topuria.
Topuria,
That's what I really want to see. Carl, that's all we got time for today. That was absolutely awesome.
Ah,
Dude, what a great episode.
Oh,
Like honestly,
absolutely.
we talked about so many things. It was absolutely amazing. We had Riley on the Mr. Producer today. Oh, dude, halfway through the pod, while you were trying to talk about UFC, he spilled a cup of water everywhere. He was trying to clean it up. He was messing with the cameras. I don't know how this is going to be. Anyway, that's all, guys. Thank you for listening. Catch you, everyone.